So lots of us are stuck at home, not spending. We've seen a massive impact on sectors like retailing, tourism, hospitality, and so on. And that could amount to something like a 10 to 12% reduction in GDP spread across the March and June quarters, particularly the June quarter. So you really need something to offset that. It needs to be big. It probably needs to add up to about 10% of GDP. And given the package announced yesterday and building on the other packages, we get up to that sort of zone. But it's not going to stop us going into recession, but it could, but it probably won't. But it will at least help protect the economy such that when we come out the other side, we can start up again.
OK, so it might not stop us from going into recession. What about a depression? The Treasurer is just coy on that word. He's very reluctant to use that word. Is it possible, or do you think that's a way off now?
I think it's a way off now. It was always possible. When you look at that number that will come out probably for the June quarter, we could be down 10%. That's a big contraction in the economy than seen at any time over the whole of the post-war period. You've got to go back to the 1930s to see something like that. So, yes, people might use the word depression, but I think it's very different. The depression was preceded by the Roaring Twenties. We had a massive boom that had to be unwound. Governments at the time did the exact opposite to what they're doing now. Monetary policy globally was tightened. We had an all-out trade war, not just between one country and another, but every country was jacking up tariffs on each other. So we had a collapse in global trade, and we had fiscal tightening. Governments worked on some stupid theory back then that if your government revenue goes down because of a hit to the economy, the best thing to do is raise tax rates. And that, of course, made things worse. This time you're seeing the exact opposite. We've seen massive monetary easing within the space of a month. We've seen massive fiscal stimulus in the space of a month. And that, I think, will head off that depression-like scenario, even though the initial growth number may look a bit depressionary. But the key is to make sure that the damage to the economy is minimised, and therefore we don't have that long tail that we saw in the 1930s where you get the hit to growth and it goes on for years and years and years and we can't get out of it.
How long might this take to recoup?
Well, it depends what you call recoup. There's the impact on the economy. The package we saw yesterday, I think, is sort of starting to tip the scales a little bit. That's why the share market reacted positively, because we had seen government action around the world, but maybe that action wasn't big enough, so share markets were still wobbly and going down. Now we're starting to see government action get a bit ahead of the curve, and that, I think, provides some confidence that, yes, we'll take a hit in the first half of the year. Depending on how long the virus goes, it might go into the second half of the year. The Prime Minister talks about 6 months often. But when the time comes and we get the virus back under control, which we will eventually, then we'll bounce back. So my feeling is we'll be seeing growth again by the end of the year. And as we go through next year, we should see a fairly decent recovery.
OK, so debt, when we go back to the GFC, Shane, debt barely budged. So is it realistic to say that it might never change? We might never get that back. We might never be able to move our debt towards levels where it was, say, 2 or 3 weeks ago.
It may be the case. I wouldn't be that negative. We did see a bit of a blowout in debt at the time of the GFC because we went from a situation where there was virtually zero Commonwealth public debt. We did have some budget deficits through that period to combat the GFC. And then much of the last decade has been about trying to get back to surplus. And it's been a long, hard slog. We got there in the last financial year, or back to balance anyway. And now, of course, we're going back into a big deficit again. It will take a long time to recover from this. This stimulus package is the mother of all stimulus packages, which means the mother of all budget blowouts. So, yeah, that's going to be a problem in the short term. But I do think that one shouldn't over-catastrophise this situation. Public debt in Australia as a whole is relatively low compared to what you see in other countries. So we are in a better position to do this than other countries. Secondly, if the government didn't do it, then, yeah, we could be staring down the barrel of a lengthy recession, if not a lengthy depression, because it would take longer to come out, which would mean a bigger hit to the budget in the years ahead as revenue got hit. And therefore we'd end up with a bigger problem. The other aspect is that it is very cheap for government to borrow right now. Government can borrow for 10 years at 0.75%. Obviously, the Reserve Bank is a part of that, but it does make it easier for them. And the final point to note is that all of these programs, virtually all of them anyway, have been set up to end within a specific time frame, sometime in the next financial year. and therefore the pressure off the budget should start to reduce, or will reduce, and that, of course, assumes that we get the virus under control.
I've got to say, Shane, you're sounding very positive. Well, not say very positive, but somewhat positive, which is very good to hear and see in this current climate. What is your latest forecast for unemployment, though? Do you think that might have eased somewhat?
I think it probably has. I mean, the reason I'm sounding positive is because we are seeing this action by governments. I mean, that builds on action by the Reserve Bank and then the banks and so on. If we didn't see that, I wouldn't be very positive today. I would be feeling a lot more negative. So thankfully, we have seen that action. Unemployment, I'd have to admit, economists' forecasts are bouncing around like yo-yos at the moment. If you'd asked me on Friday, I would have said unemployment is going somewhere between 10 to 15%, maybe up as high as 12%. Just look at the queues outside Centrelink. Today, the reality is that to the extent that companies take up these wage subsidy arrangements, then that will keep a lot of people off the unemployment queues and keep them in jobs. And therefore, you may not see that headline zapping surge in unemployment. Maybe we can contain it to somewhere a high around 8 or 9%, and then it can quickly come back down again once we reach the other side. So I think the reality is that this package has taken a lot of pressure off the headline unemployment rate.
So perhaps single figures, is that your latest estimate?
It gives...
Well,
that's right.
That's something. I've got to say.
Some confidence. It'll be single figures as opposed to double digits.
I tell you what, there was a bit of dooming and glooming, if that's even a word, last week, Shane, where people were suggesting that it could go to 20% unemployment. So that's positive. We're thinking single figures at this stage. Just finally, before you go, Shane, these moratoriums on evictions, I just want to get your thoughts on that, and if you think that businesses should be remaining open in this current climate.
I'd have to say that I think that where a business can shut, it's probably healthier in the interests of us all to shut or have their people work at home. I know that's very hard in a whole bunch of industries, but all the evidence suggests that we have a problem here. If you don't limit the number of people getting this virus, then you will overwhelm the hospital system and then more people will die. You can see that in Italy, you can see that in Spain, and we're starting to see that possibly in France even, where the death rate is sort of pushing up. I think in Italy, at latest numbers, it's around 11%. We don't want something like that to happen. We don't want doctors to say, well, they decide who lives and who dies. The older person doesn't get the ventilator, but the younger person does, or vice versa. That's the sort of thing we don't want. So I think the best thing we can do from a health perspective is go into hibernation as much as possible through this period. Get it done quickly, get the virus under control quickly, and then, we can rebuild when we come out the other side. The worst thing you want to do is drag it out, let lots of people get the illness, overwhelm the hospital system, and then end up with a death rate like Italy, where 11% of people who get it die. We don't want to see that.
Yeah, it's absolutely horrific.